Morant with a running start. Elevates. Oh, it dunks. Oh, my goodness.
Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn his heat. It's gone. Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining. Conley now with three. Count it. A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance.
Adams going long. Morant. He hit it. John Morant. Insanity.
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. My name is Keith Parrish. I hope you've been enjoying your off season. The Grizzlies, of course, they missed the postseason. They missed the postseason for the first time since I've been doing this podcast. So things are a little bit weird with the release schedule, I feel like, but I've been enjoying watching these playoffs without having any skin in the game. So I hope you've also been enjoying the playoffs as they occur quite excitingly all around us. Anyways, on today's episode, I'm going to go over a tiny bit of Grizzlies news and mainly focus on the Grizzlies roster and their specific goals for the offseason, especially as it relates to which players may or may not be coming back, and also talking about the sorts of players the team should be looking at in trades and in the draft and in free agency. But before I do, just a word from Underdog Fantasy. If you want to play fantasy sports for cash, you can do that with Underdog. If you're watching the NBA playoffs and want to do a little daily fantasy, if you want to pick some highers or lowers, you can do all of that at Underdog. And if you sign up using promo code FBBF, that's FBBF as in Fast Break Breakfast, Underdog will match your opening deposit up to $100. So if you want to give Underdog a try, just use that promo code FBBF or click the link in this episode's description. All right, the Grizzlies news that came out of the last week, I think the biggest bit of it is about Yuta Watanabe's retirement from the NBA. This honestly kind of big news for us Grizzlies fans who are closely monitoring roster spots and closely monitoring the salary cap situation for the Grizzlies. And this was a little bit surprising. I feel like for fans, for us on the outside, maybe the Grizzlies knew this when they traded for him, that he was likely to decline that player option for next season. But Yuta did not have a good year in the NBA. He did not play much on the Suns. He started the season in their rotation, eventually fell out of the rotation. By the time he got basically dumped to the Grizzlies, he wasn't playing much. He only appeared in 5 games for the Grizzlies. He made 1 out of 10 three-pointers on the Grizzlies. He only shot 18% from 3 over his final 21 appearances of the season. So it wasn't, again, a very good year for Yuta on the basketball court. So you would think, well, he's not going to turn down a player option for $2.6 million. This might be his last chance to make $2.6 million in a season. But turns out he decided he didn't enjoy playing in the NBA, and he announced he's going to play professionally in Japan next year. And honestly, this feels like, again, a big break for the Grizzlies. Not only do they clear his salary, which is a big deal because the Grizzlies are going to be up against the first apron, it looks like. They're definitely going to be a luxury tax team unless they make several moves to get under it. But not only does it save them the money, it frees up a very important roster spot. If Yuta had decided to opt into that contract, the Grizzlies would have had 14 players under contract if they kept Luke Kennard, and that's not even counting the top 10 pick. They would have had 15 players if you count Luke Kennard and the top 10 pick on guaranteed deals for next season. So Yuta going to play professionally in Japan helps out the Grizzlies. It makes that David Roddy trade essentially a salary dump where you picked up a chance at swapping first rounders. So you got a pick swap with the Suns in 2026, and then you sent out Roddy. You cleared up a roster spot for next year. You got rid of his salary, so you cleared some salary space. So you ended up at the trade deadline unloading the salaries of Steven Adams and Xavier Tillman and Roddy. Of course, Tillman's contract was going to expire. He was going to be a free agent, but you get rid of the money owed to Roddy. You pick up that potential first-round pick swap in the future. And now you've also created a roster spot, which I think is important for the Grizzlies. It gives them just a little bit more optionality to build out this roster. And now knowing that Yuta is not going to be on the team next year, I feel like the roster's coming into focus, and you can clearly see, where the needs are, and also maybe where the roster's a little bit unbalanced, and you can see how that might affect what the Grizzlies do this offseason. Now, the clear hole on this roster, of course, is in the front court, and the lack of bigs. The only guys you would call bigs on the team, there's Jaren, of course, then Brandon Clark, and then Santi Aldama. It's about it, and that certainly is not good enough to become a playoff team that wins multiple rounds. And at the end of season media availability, Zach Kleiman pointed out, yes, clearly we need to get a big this offseason. There wasn't very much said at the end of season media availability that I feel like was that notable. That's one of the reasons I didn't podcast after the Grizzlies media availability, because nothing was really said. However, Zach Kleiman was very clear, we're going to get a big this summer. Either draft or free agency or trade, we are going to get a big. He said, quote, "We're not trying to hide the ball," meaning they're not trying to deceive anyone. They're not being coy. They're letting the entire NBA know, hey, we need a big. So if you have an idea for a trade, hit us up. We're interested. We're going to be trying to get a big. So you look at the roster right now, and you do have that clear hole in the front court, and possibly as your starting center alongside Jaren. There were some questions asked to Zach and to Taylor Jenkins about, do you prefer Jaren at the 5? And they said a lot he's good at the 5, and we like that look, but also we want a bigger player beside him, and we want a screener, and we like the way the team performs when we have someone, they didn't say like Steven Adams, but they were saying, with a big center in there. Brandon Clark was asked if he wanted to start next year, and Brandon Clark, I feel like somewhat surprisingly, was like, I'd rather come off the bench behind a big center. So Brandon Clark isn't even clamoring to start. He said, no, let's get a big body in here. So you look at the Grizzlies roster, and you look at the pieces that I think you're absolutely certain are going to be back. Then you look at the holes. Of course, the hole for a big, quite obvious. We've been talking about it for a while. But you have your core, the guys who aren't going anywhere. Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. Then I think you can include a few other bench players that I don't think are going anywhere, and I feel very comfortable with them being a part of the rebounded Memphis Grizzlies, the next great Grizzlies team, which is hopefully next season. I feel very comfortable having Brandon Clark off the bench for that. I also feel very comfortable having the young guys that we promoted last year off of their two-way deals, Gigi Jackson and Vince Williams Jr. I look at the team right there, and those 6 players, Jaren Jackson Jr., Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Gigi Jackson, Vince Williams Jr., Brandon Clark, those 6 not going anywhere, no matter what. It would be stunning if there was a trade that involved any of those guys. I think it would be a pretty big blockbuster deal. So I have that essentially as the Grizzlies' locked in stone top 6. Now, of course, I'm not including Marcus Smart. Marcus Smart, who was the team's big acquisition last year. And I don't have him included just because if I'm breaking this down to the bare bones, if I'm going down to the foundation of this team, I think it's much more assured that you have our big 3, Ja, Jaren, and Dez, and then these bench players that we trust. Maybe Vince Williams Jr. doesn't belong in that conversation. For me, he does because of how he played, because of his salary. We're building a roster based on the limitations of NBA salary rules. So Vince Williams Jr., super cheap on his deal, probably still has a lot of upside. Also, the perfect complementary piece to our big 3 of Ja, Jaren, and Dez. So I'm including Vince Williams Jr. Marcus could be an extremely important part of the Grizzlies next season. He could absolutely be the team's 4th best player. He could absolutely start the whole year. He could help this team make the conference finals. But the reason I'm not including him in like this top 6 ultra core that I'm building around is I think when you look at those 6 players I mentioned, he's maybe not the perfect fit alongside the guys you have. Like in an ideal world and in a salary cap league, in an ideal world, you might not spend $20 million per year on another guard. And yes, Dez can play small forward. Yes, Marcus can sort of play small forward. I mean, they both can. They can both guard up a little bit. But overall, your team is small. If you have Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, you're just a little bit small overall. And also compounding the issue with being small is Jaren, your best big by a lot, is a subpar rebounder. So that's why I don't have him in the absolute inner sanctum of a top 6. Now, you can make it a top 7. I have no issue with that whatsoever. So if you include Marcus Smart as like part of your top 7, then all right, you could say you got 4 of your starters locked down. Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., and then Marcus Smart or Vince Williams Jr., maybe even Gigi Jackson. We can go ahead and just default and say Marcus Smart is going to be the starter. I've been pretty clear for a while. I think it makes more sense to bring Marcus Smart off the bench. The Cliff Notes version of that, I know this has been a conversation recently. Brevin Knight, in I believe the last game of the season, talking about how Vince Williams Jr. would be a great option to start. I agree and have basically been supporting Marcus Smart coming off the bench for months now, most simply because, there's basically 2 reasons. One, I think in the starting lineup, I'd prefer to have a lower usage player. Marcus Smart, he likes to shoot the basketball. This is the same issue we ran into with Dylan Brooks when everyone was like, hey, Dylan Brooks, what if he just played defense and shot open threes and layups? Okay, but that's not Dylan Brooks. Marcus Smart shoots less than Dylan Brooks does, but he's not efficient. He's an inefficient shooter, and he shoots the ball a lot. Personally, I think the fit is a little bit better with a lower usage guy in there. Also, when we talk about the limitations of Jaren and Desmond and Ja as far as rebounding, Vince Williams Jr. is a better rebounder. So you can close with Marcus Smart, where that added ball handling makes a ton of sense to help you in crunch time, where his superior play, just being a better player, no issue whatsoever. Close with Marcus Smart. If he's part of your best 5, great. But to me, it makes sense to move a higher usage player like Marcus onto the bench where he can help elevate those second units. Also, if you look at a potential second unit for next season, let's say if your bench lineup, let's say you bring Luke Kennard back and your bench lineup is Luke Kennard, Gigi Jackson, Jake LaRavia, and Brandon Clark. You add Marcus Smart to that lineup. I like that. I trust that bench lineup a lot more. I feel like Marcus Smart can elevate that bench lineup way better than Vince Williams Jr. could. Like a Luke Kennard, Vince Williams Jr., Gigi Jackson, Jake LaRavia, Brandon Clark, or say Santi Aldama, Brandon Clark, whatever. If you're going with an all-5 bench lineup, I think Marcus Smart way elevates that lineup as opposed to a Vince Williams Jr. Marcus Smart's play creation, his ability to create his own shot, I think he can definitely uplift that second unit way more than someone like Vince Williams Jr. could. Meanwhile, I think the complementary nature of Vince Williams Jr.'s game works much better with our starters. Also, the other issue is just minutes played, straight up minutes played. I think Marcus Smart is going to be better served to play around 25 minutes per game. If that's the case, I feel like it's easier to do that, to accomplish that and get the most out of Marcus Smart by having him start with the second unit and then not share the court at the same time with Ja, Desmond, and Jaren. The idea being, if this hasn't been clear to you, the best shots the Grizzlies can get next year when the starters are on the court, the best shots you want Ja Morant to shoot, you want Desmond Bane to shoot, you want Jaren Jackson Jr. to shoot, and you want a center to dunk the basketball. All of those options are likely better than Marcus Smart shooting. So every time Marcus Smart shoots, it's not the best outcome. At least that's my very basic analysis of it. If Marcus Smart starts, it's going to be fine. He's a good player. They will balance the lineups just fine. But that's, again, became a little bit longer than a Cliff Notes. That's, repeat, why I feel like it makes more sense to not start Marcus Smart. He can be the veteran leader and also sixth man. Also, he can close all the games. I don't really care about that. But let's say you include Marcus Smart as part of your top 7. Now let's just look at what we have. We have a top 7, and most of our salary is going towards these guys. Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, Jaren Jackson Jr. That's 4 out of 5 on a probably really good starting lineup. And then your bench, the guys I think I'm counting on being here, that I consider are crucial to the Grizzlies' future, G.G. Jackson, Vince Williams Jr., Brandon Clark. Now, that right there, the salary of those guys, you're well north of $130 million in salary. Now, you also have to fill out the rest of your roster. You got to get at least 14 other players on your team. Your top 10 pick is going to make, $7 million per season or more. So you start running into the salary concerns at this point. And let's say, when you look at the roster and you say, all right, John Conchar, $6 million or so, and Zaire Williams, $6 million or so, and Santi Aldama, close to $4 million, and it keeps going and going and going, and all of a sudden, you're over the luxury tax, and you're scraping up against the first apron. Now, the first apron is the thing that Grizzlies are likely going to try to avoid under all circumstances. Almost every NBA team now is going to try to avoid being over the first apron if you can help it, because there become these punitive limitations. Not just financial penalties, there's limitations to what you can take back in a trade. You can't use your MLE and things. So the Grizzlies are likely going to stay under that first apron, which is, my understanding, it's around $179 million. Now, if you filled out your roster, let's even say with the players we know that are going to be back. Let's say we include everybody but Luke Kennard. You essentially have, I'd say, Luke Kennard's worth of money available to use on something else. I believe the Grizzlies can dodge the first apron, keeping everybody now. This is, again, keeping everyone under contract that is already under contract and adding a top 10 pick. You could choose to keep Luke Kennard, and I believe you're right at the first apron. Now, the problem is when it comes to Luke Kennard, and I think when we think about roster building, is we still haven't solved our center issue when we talk about all these things. Even if you draft Donovan Clingan or whoever, is that center who's a rookie going to be good enough for you to win a first-round series in his rookie season? I find that hard to believe, or at least not probable. So ideally, I think if you're building a roster, instead of paying Luke Kennard $15 million, which would be picking up his player option, you would actually rather have a center who makes $15 million, because that center is playing way more of a position of need than Luke Kennard is. You have several players ahead of Luke Kennard in your depth chart who you'd rather play over him. And I'm talking about, the obvious ones: Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, plus also Vince Williams Jr., plus G.G. Jackson. They sized him up to play power forward some. I like sizing him down too. He's a huge shooting guard. I'm totally cool with playing him there. So that's one reason I don't feel like Luke Kennard's probably going to be back this year, even if they did say they value his 3-point shooting. Just when you look at this depth chart, even when you look at the pared down, bare bones, down to the foundation, the 7 players or even 6 players locked in stone, Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, Jaren Jackson Jr., Vince Williams Jr., G.G. Jackson, Brandon Clark. If you had one other $15 million salaried player to add to that, you would not pick an undersized shooting guard. You just wouldn't. Doesn't make any sense. You'd pick a big. And so because of that, I think Luke Kennard both a good option for a trade where you'd have to attach something. You'd have to pick up his option and then attach picks to move Luke Kennard for a usable, good center, like the kind of guys who make the right salary that could help you. You think about the Wendell Carter Jr.'s of the world. You think about maybe trying to get Onyeka Okongwu from the Hawks. You think about, Ivica Zubac from the Clippers. These are guys making over $10 million a year who you could probably, if all those teams, if the Clippers lose in the first round, maybe that a player like that could be available. But just as a mental exercise, when you look at who the Grizzlies have, you wouldn't really spend all that money to bring back Luke Kennard, because you'd rather spend that money on a center, on someone who plays a position of more need. Now, if you free yourself up a little bit to maybe use your imagination for what the Grizzlies roster could be, if you don't include Marcus Smart as part of your inner sanctum, as part of your most important core, it really gives you a lot of optionality for how you could build the team. And even though we constantly talk about the luxury tax concerns, we talk about dodging the second apron, if you consider the fact that maybe Marcus Smart is not the absolute ideal perfect fit as a fourth player alongside Ja, Jaren, and Dez, you actually have some wiggle room to bring in larger salaries. Because when I look at the players who could very likely be on the team next year, who are under contract, and I'm including now, all right, this top six I keep mentioning, Ja, Desmond, Jaren. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to keep flashing these on the screen, so maybe it's easier to follow along. But you got Ja, Dez, Jaren, Brandon, Gigi, and Vince. And then if you have some of the cheaper role players that you already have, Derrick Rose, he's coming back, so we'll count him. We'll count Santi Aldama, again, a crucial big. We need bigs. I'm going to count Jake LaRavia because he finished the season so well. Now we've gotten up to 10 players. Let's go ahead and include that top 10 pick we just selected. Now we're up to 11 players. Or even if we don't include the draft pick, we got 10 players now. And guess what? We have nearly $45 million, possibly up to 47. The math, a little bit murky. But let's just say we have over $40 million worth of salary that we can use before we hit the first apron. Just look at it like this. Marcus Smart plus Luke Kennard plus John Conchar plus Zaire Williams, they're on the books for making $47 million combined next season. Is the best use of $47 million worth of salary on those players? Of course not. Not if you're trying to win. Now, of course, it's also not like you can just spend $47 million on whoever you want. There's extreme limitations on how you even get players in. You can't just pick out the perfect player. So, as much as I mentioned, let's not bring back Luke Kennard, I don't want to get rid of him for nothing. Luke Kennard is better than nothing, of course. Luke Kennard's a good bench player. Obviously a great shooter. Same with Marcus Smart. Marcus Smart's really, really good. Clearly the fourth best player on the Grizzlies. I just talk more about fit, and I talk more about, well, what if we got a player who played a different position? And I don't know if some of these guys are good who make more money than are the guys we normally talk about. Is Clint Capella a good fit on the Grizzlies? He might be. I prefer whatever center we got to be younger, to be cheaper, to be able to shoot a jump shot. But also I think there's a strong argument to be made. Your team would be better next year if you had Clint Capella instead of Marcus Smart, even if Marcus Smart is a better player than Clint Capella, just because you need a center. You can fill all your guard and wing minutes with Ja and Desmond and Vince and Gigi, and let's say even Conchar or even Luke Kennard. If you traded Marcus Smart, you can keep Luke Kennard. Great. Now there's a guard spot for Luke Kennard to play. But the idea being, I'm not married to Marcus Smart having to be on the team. Now, the Grizzlies just traded for him last summer. They saw something. They thought this might be the perfect fit. So this is probably just a podcaster exercise of fun. It's going to have no actual utility in the real world. But I think when we look at the things that could happen this offseason, I'm opening my mind towards, what if we take back guys who actually have sort of bad salary? They're undervalued assets. The one I keep mentioning to the Patreon supporters in the Slack is Andrew Wiggins. The Warriors, of course, missed the playoffs. Andrew Wiggins wasn't very good last year. Guess what? Andrew Wiggins, in my mind, an amazing fit with Jaren Jackson Jr. He can be your starting three. Then if you size up Jaren to the 5 and Wiggins to the 4, Wiggins is a good rebounder. He's a good defender. The Warriors might pay you to get rid of him. I personally think, just because of positional need and positional scarcity, I'd probably be in favor of trading Marcus Smart for Andrew Wiggins. There is risk in that deal. Andrew Wiggins might just be rapidly declining. But those are the kind of calculated gambles I think make sense to me. Like the Grizzlies do a lot of calculated gambles. They sent the Suns 3 second-round picks for a calculated gamble that they might eventually get a first-round pick swap. Seems unlikely, but they tried it. So I think what I think about as a fan and what I think about this Grizzlies team, if I were asked to advise on what the paths forward are, is like you have to make these calculations of what's our best chance to win a title. And I think, we want to strike when the iron is hot, which is basically the next 2 seasons while Jaren is still under contract. And like, what are the odds of winning a title in the next 2 seasons? Is it, I think maybe the easiest path is Gigi Jackson becomes amazing. Like that's one path. If Gigi Jackson becomes a near all-star, great. We have a really good chance maybe of winning a title in the next couple of years. The next one is, what are the odds the person you take in the top 10 is your best path towards a title for that person? Whoever you take in the top 10, like you get hit a home run. I feel like the odds of that are extremely low. Not just because of this being a weak draft, but that's just always the case. What are the odds you get a game-changing player in the top 10? 5%, 10%, somewhere around there. I mean, of course, the Grizzlies could jump into the top 4. Then it becomes a little painful that this is such a weak draft. But like that's another option. The other one that I keep thinking about is what if you can get a bounce back year on someone who's proven they can contribute to a title. Someone like Andrew Wiggins, who right now the contract looks bad. This is also what I think about like Cam Johnson, who I'm a little bit, over enamored with. Cam Johnson's salary thought of as being maybe a little bit upside down. Like the Nets are underwater. They don't want to pay Cam Johnson all that. I think Cam Johnson might look amazing on a team with a real point guard. Marcus Smart, better player than Cam Johnson. I'd probably trade Marcus Smart straight up for Cam Johnson just because the fit's better in my mind. My subjective opinion is the fit's better. So I think there's some guys out there who the contract's maybe not perfect, but I think you'd want to consider trading either Marcus Smart or opting in Luke Kennard and trading Luke Kennard and swapping those guys out for someone who either is a big 3 who can size up to the 4 or someone who's a 5 who can play alongside Jaren. So I think there are a lot of paths forward for the Grizzlies if you open your mind up to that. Again, to repeat, when you look at the Grizzlies roster, like the 14 players under contract for next year, that's everybody coming back, and then I'm adding in a top 10 pick. If you look at where they have the biggest hole, it's this gaping hole at center. And I think it would make sense to take either Marcus or Luke and use that salary to bring in someone like, does Jeremy Grant make you better? He's not a center. He's signed for forever. I find Jeremy Grant's contract to be especially daunting. But like Jeremy Grant, I think fits cleaner alongside Ja, Jaren, and Desmond than Marcus Smart does. You still need a center in this situation. And that's when we get into all the free agent talk. I think we've mentioned them before and they're worth repeating. Guys like Gogo Batadze or Jalen Smith or Daniel Tice, all of these players, free agents, you could probably get them in for not that much because the center market, normally depressed, doesn't cost that much to bring those guys in. So like, these are the things I'm certainly thinking about. Because like, if you look at that Grizzlies roster and you say, all right, we have these 10 players, John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., Gigi Jackson, Vince Williams Jr., Santi Aldama, Brandon Clark, Derrick Rose, and Jake LaRavia. Now you have $47 million to fill out that roster. If that exercise left you open to take any player you wanted who made that much money, you would not spend 35 of that $45 million on Luke Kennard and Marcus Smart. Doesn't make sense. Like you're just loading up on guards. I don't think that's the way you're going to win a title. You got to have bigger players. You need a center. You need wings with size, preferably ones that can shoot. So that's where my mind's at right now. I'm curious what you guys think. The other part of maybe trading Marcus Smart, using his larger salary to bring in a bad, quote unquote, bad salary, is you might also pick up assets. Like you could be the one receiving draft picks for players. Like here's a weird one. Not a perfect fit, but like, would the Lakers give you a first round pick and Rui Hachimura for Marcus Smart, I'd certainly consider that. I think Rui could be a very good offensive option for the Grizzlies. Gives them more firepower, gives them better punch. I mean, of course, the Grizzlies, they were the worst offensive team in the NBA this year. That's because of injury. But even when Ja Morant was around, the Grizzlies weren't that good of an offense, and their offense was all predicated on turnovers and fast breaks and offensive rebounding. Back when Steven Adams and Jonas Valanciunas was here, they were bad at half-court offense. Could Rui Hachimura help your half-court offense? All of those things, they're just things to think about. I'm not throwing out Marcus Smart for Rui Hachimura. Okay, I am. But, like, could you get back picks for that? How many more good years does Marcus Smart have? Unfortunately, Marcus Smart is injury prone. How are we maximizing the next 2 years? And the final thing to think about before I embrace more of this wacky offseason. Another path forward, unpopular, but worth saying out loud. What could Gigi Jackson get you back in a trade? What's more likely? And this is not a rhetorical question. Like, I think you might want to think, if we're going to win a title in the next 2 years, is Gigi Jackson at the peak of his trade value? So what's more likely? Is it more likely Gigi Jackson develops into an all-star, which is certainly one path? Is that more likely than this being the peak of his trade value, where he finished the last 2 months of the season, which, let's be real, the basketball doesn't actually mean that much when you're 20 games under 500. So like Gigi Jackson looked awesome. I'm very excited for what he could be going forward. But I think another path forward you want to think about, and I don't think they do it because it's too risky. This is the kind of move that like gets you fired if you're a GM. But you think, hey, is this peak value Gigi Jackson? Like if we include Gigi Jackson and Marcus Smart, can now we get Mikal Bridges back? Can now we get one of those good players that we think could be an all-star on our team? One of those guys we pursued in previous seasons. Does Gigi Jackson have the valuation of a very high premium first-round pick? Or is he equal to like 2 first-round picks? It's risky. And I think, honestly, maybe the odds are better that just Gigi Jackson develops, or that's your hope. But anyways, that's a path forward. And despite the Grizzlies being likely in the luxury tax and pushing up against that first apron, I think when you start aggregating the salaries of some of the guys on the team, Luke Kennard especially, Marcus Smart, and then Zaire and Conchar, those guys, again, their salaries, those 4 players add up to $47 million. And you can actually do a lot of things if you get bold and do that. But anyways, thanks you guys for listening. Hope you're having a fun off season. I'll get more into kind of a season wrap-up mode. I still want to look back on the year, kind of assess my opinion of what everybody did. And then, of course, I will release at some point the season in review, the Great Grizzlies Stats Spectacular episode. I hope you look forward to that. That's always a lot of fun to do. Anyways, if you want to support this show, do that at patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. Join that Grits and Grinds listener Slack. Also get some bonus content if you sign up over there. All right. Hope you guys have a great week. I'll talk to you soon. Go Grizz.